Today's guest and our first guest is Hester Peirce, the commissioner at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and head of the agency's new crypto task force. The industry also knows her as Crypto Mom. With that said, Hester Peirce, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me, and congratulations again on the new show. I do want to give you my disclaimer, which you might expect, which is that my views are my own views as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Hester, let's start off. I've heard you say in the past you're not crazy about the nickname Crypto Mom. Is that still the case now that you're leading crypto policy at the SEC?
Well, I mean, I don't mind being called Crypto Mom, but I think what I don't like is the idea that people think about the government as being their mom and taking care of them. And part of my whole message as a commissioner has been, I'm a big fan of freedom, but with freedom comes responsibility. And so people need to not look to mom to make decisions for them, but make their own decisions and bear their own consequences.
Hester, I broke the story 2 weeks ago that the Crypto Task Force was going to be holding a series of industry roundtables called Spring Sprint Towards Crypto Clarity. Love the name, by the way. Your first one is this coming Friday, and you're going to look to tackle a question that pretty much everybody, judges, lawyers, regulators, and academics have been scratching their heads over for years, and that's, are digital assets securities, commodities, currencies, or something else entirely? How do you plan on doing that exactly?
Well, we're bringing together a great group of people, of experts from the outside, and I think that is kind of how we're thinking about all of these problems, that we can't solve them ourselves by just working at the SEC. We really need to bring other people in who have been thinking about these issues. And I think for me, one of the things that I expect to be valuable is the interplay between or among the panelists. There are a lot of different views that are represented on that round table, and so I expect that we're going to get some clarity through that. Do I expect that we're going to come out of that with all the answers? Not necessarily, but I think this will help us as we think through these issues.
I feel like this is kind of the general take towards the SEC in the past. It was considered like crypto industry's public enemy number one. I never felt that way about you, Hester. I always felt like you were kind of trying to push the industry forward in the most thoughtful way. And now the tides may be changing with the current administration, the shifting and withdrawing non-fraud enforcement actions, taking meetings with industry stakeholders, putting out guidance, so on and so forth. And we've talked with someone who said they walked away from a meeting with you saying, this should be the norm, not the exception. I feel like a question a lot of us have is, why did it take so long to get here?
I have that same question. This was a real failure on the part of the SEC, and I think, it was a government-wide failure. When something new comes on the horizon, we should be working to figure out how we can make sure the rules are clear. And that's not like a pro-industry take. That's a pro-American public take. The public wants to know that the government is thinking about new things, identifying where rules need to be adjusted or clarified with respect to those new things, and then going ahead and doing it. And that was just something that there was this a very anti-crypto policy objective, I think, that took over. And then we ended up doing a lot of work through enforcement that should have been done through the regulatory divisions. And that's what we're trying to flip right now. It is a long process to get back to the right place, but I think at the end of the day, we'll see investors and consumers and industry all in a better place. And frankly, us as a regulator, because there's no way that we could have done this job only using enforcement resources. It's much more efficient, actually, to write rules and then enforce the rules you've written.
Would you say it's fair to say that the SEC no longer really wants to enforce upon the crypto industry, and you rather do it more like thoughtfully now going forward? Or is there still going to be enforcements?
No, I mean, I think part of writing good rules and having a good framework in place is that you enforce it when people violate it. Now, when you see an industry-wide problem, you might decide, okay, we're going to do a guidance document first to make sure that people understand what it is. We're going to work through our examination division, which works with broker-dealers, investment and advisors, and other regulated entities. But yes, there's room for enforcement. And without doubt, there's room for enforcement when it comes to fraud. Now, I think we will have to ask the question, is this within our remit as a securities regulator? But if it is, we certainly will be pursuing fraud cases, and that is not even pausing now while we're trying to get the clarity. So I think it is good to caution people, don't pretend this is just open season for you to rip other people off, because if we don't have the jurisdiction, we're going to look for someone else who does.
You just set me up kind of perfectly, just going on, how the industry has sort of felt, over the last 4 or 5 years, just in this period of enforcement. One of the challenges that I think attorneys in the space have had with some of the enforcement actions that have come out was it was actually really hard to find damages. If the SEC is protecting consumers and investors, it was very hard to find enforcement actions where consumers had actually been harmed, versus a lot of the cases or situations in the industry, like, Three Arrows or FTX, where there was maybe a lack of investigation or enforcement. You obviously have a lot of resources at your disposal now, and I think it's probably fair to say that you'd agree, you're not going after the Ukis and the libraries. Like, we're looking for real fraud here. How do you think about that mix of resources you have, whether it's guidance or individual enforcement, and like, how can the industry kind of anticipate working with you on that front?
Well, I think that's exactly how we have to think about it. We have a toolkit, and we got to figure out which tool to pull out and use. And so I think what we're doing is we're starting out by trying to put out some guidance where things clearly aren't within our jurisdiction. And then for stuff that is within our jurisdiction, how can we bring life to this come in and register mantra that we've heard? As you all know, telling a tiny project that's developing something on the blockchain to come in and register as if you're a public company, or a company going public for the first time, is really not realistic, and frankly not even that helpful for people who are buying the token, because there's a different set of information they need. So I think trying to figure out what do the laws look like as applied in this particular context. So we'll do some of that, and then really, as you say, thinking about where's the real potential for harm, and where can we as a regulator do something about that? Where can we as a regulator tell a sister regulator that they might want to look into something? And that can include international regulators, because sometimes conduct is not in the U.S. and it doesn't make sense for us to use our resources going after entities that are based somewhere else. Maybe it does if there are a lot of U.S. folks involved, but we have to think about our jurisdictional limits. But I think that the question that you raise, sometimes I would look at those cases too, and I would say, what is the harm to people? And in fact, the enforcement settlement would say, okay, you got to stop offering this in the U.S., which at the end of the day could end up being worse for the American consumer who's being cut off from access to something. And so I'm hoping that we can get to a place where people don't cut U.S. folks out, but rather are excited to build in the U.S. and to offer to U.S. persons.
You talked about jurisdiction, Hester, and kind of sticking to the SEC's jurisdiction, making sure you're focusing on what are securities and kind of letting the rest go, maybe to another agency, just making sure that you're honing in directly on what the SEC's remit is. Coinbase sued you guys in 2023 for refusing to engage in clear rulemaking for crypto. So now that you guys kind of have this idea of what you're doing moving forward, you have the crypto task force. Are you planning to hone in on rulemaking now as a top priority, alongside what Congress is doing, alongside what the Presidential Working Group for Digital Assets are doing at the White House? I'm curious to know your path forward on rulemaking, but then also how that sort of integrates with what Congress is doing and what the White House is looking for you guys to do. How do you guys all communicate, I guess? How is that? How is that done? How is the sauce made?
It works better than you might think with so many people involved. And I think part of what we're trying to do is really tell Congress and the other people who are thinking about what a legislative framework might look like, telling them this is where we see a potential gap. And that doesn't mean that I think that needs to be filled with an intense regulatory regime, but I want people to know that we don't think that the SEC has authority in this place. So if Congress wants to put something in, that's fine. And then I think what we're hoping to do is to get some relief out pretty quickly to enable people to do things right away. But with the idea that we're looking down the road to longer term, either regulation or legislation or both. And so maybe what we do can help feed into that. We certainly are trying to create a regime that is, people can have enough confidence that the rules aren't going to change radically. But they also don't have to wait until legislation is finalized and the implementing regulations are finalized, because that can take quite a long time. So we're trying to figure out how we can, provide that medium-term relief, and then that will feed into the longer term. But there's a lot of coordination and conversation, and I find it helpful just to get the different perspectives. I'm sure there'll be more and more of that as time goes along. We're all, as you know, there was an executive order asking everyone to kind of take inventory of where our rules are now and where they need to go. And so that's a process that I think will help all of us, figure out what's in our remit and then work together to figure out how to move forward.
I think crafting crypto policy is clearly top of mind, not just for the SEC, but the CFTC, Congress, White House, all the other acronyms. And I know you said at Milk and FinTech Symposium that the SEC and CFTC has started working together on the staff level. But are there any concrete plans to reestablish the joint committee? And then if not, how are you all keeping on the same page and everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think the informal communications can be helpful. And I think we'll have, I talked to my fellow commissioners. I was just at an event earlier this week with Commissioner Mersinger from the CFTC. And so we have a lot of informal interactions, and I think that can be very helpful. And then we'll see as we go further down the road if we want to establish a more formal mechanism for working together. But I really think the informal staff conversations and commissioner conversations are what is helpful right now. And then we'll see what Congress decides to do. And I think what I want to underscore is this is really less about who Congress decides to give authority to or, how they anticipate doing this. We want to get it right. And so I think both agencies are committed to getting it right, regardless of where the authority goes. And the fact that we have really strong working relationships at the commissioner level, including incoming Chairman Quintens, he and I worked together on some things in the past that I think will be a helpful basis for future work. So I think that will sustain the work going forward.
Yeah, I think Brian's a great guy, great addition, to this administration. Really excited to see the progress that you guys can make there. I want to take a half step back, right? I think the people on this podcast sort of live and breathe this stuff. We've been talking a lot about the SEC versus the CFTC, and just want to clarify some of that, for the folks at home. We talk about, securities and the way those are regulated. We've been referring to the Howey test as an industry for a long time, where we're talking about control, the management effort of others. And then the reason, that the CFTC would be involved in oversight would be that a digital asset actually reaches this stage where there is no direct management or control. And now we're feel like, please correct me where I screw this up, right? But where we're now treating it like a commodity. And so therefore there's no single management team. The reason that the industry is so concerned about this is there was sort of a path forward for Bitcoin. Famously, Satoshi was sort of never the manager of Bitcoin. And then Ethereum had kind of time and a pathway to get to what some would consider commodity status as well. I know a lot of projects want a roadmap to this idea of sufficient decentralization. You've talked a lot about sort of sandboxes or safe harbors. Miles Jennings, a former colleague of Brian at the CFTC, and Andreessen just put out the RFI, the response to the RFI earlier this week, and they've been very focused on control over the asset as a big metric. I co-chair the Layer 1 working group of the Blockchain Association, and I know that this definition of decentralization is very tricky for our members as well. Where do you stand on that? Like, how do we get to a place where, we can talk about, okay, this asset has moved from this category and now it's over in this bucket? Or do you think we need to do that?
Well, I think we need to have a workable approach, and I want to make sure that people, we've been living in this world where people are always uncertain about where something fits. So I think that's kind of the key. We need an approach that's easy to administer, and that has to be for us and for people out there in the world trying to apply the approach. And I think you're right to focus on decentralization versus control, because they both kind of try to get at the same kind of thing, but control is a more common approach in the securities laws. And so I think a lot of people have suggested that we think about that kind of approach. Miles will be one of the participants at the roundtable, and so I am hoping that some of those kinds of issues will get teed up and we'll be able to discuss those. Part of the reason that we as a task force put out all those questions a couple weeks ago is that we really do have questions and we really do want to get to the right place. I should emphasize that we are trying to move forward as quickly as possible. And so, we are continuing to work even as we're getting incoming feedback from people, which has been really helpful. But we get the fact that this initial question of, is it going to be a security or is it a commodity, or how long is it within the SEC's remit? When does it move to some other regulatory jurisdiction? Those are key questions, and we get that. And I don't want to end up in a world where, there's lack of clarity, but also where you have multiple regulatory regimes essentially with the same objective but different approaches to achieving something. And so I think we're all working toward getting to the place that clear lines, sensible lines, and clear authority.
So clear lines, sensible lines, clear authority. What are some of the other takeaways that you're really trying to get from these roundtables? Maybe, let's say, in 2025. I know we got like 9
And
months
did my
left.
invite get lost in the mail, or is it? Or for the next one?
This is your official invite,
Yeah.
I think. If she
Tell
likes
me
this
which
episode.
one you want to be on. We are. I know some people have actually reached out, and it's really hard to make decisions about who will be on the roundtable because there are a lot of great minds out there. But if people think they have something to contribute on a particular topic, let us know. Another central area of questions was around custody, both for investment advisors and broker-dealers. I think that's an area that we're going to need a lot of help in thinking through how to approach that. Our special purpose broker-dealer model at the SEC has gotten panned by most people, so we're trying to figure out how do we move forward with something that makes more sense. Thinking too about what does it look like for a trading platform to be regulated well in this area. Again, some of these issues are maybe bigger than the SEC, but I think having those conversations about what that looks like also makes sense. We do want to think about decentralized finance at some point. I feel very strongly about making sure that we're protecting developers in the United States, that we're protecting the ability of people to interact peer-to-peer in the United States. And so that's something that's on my mind, and I welcome input on as well.
Yeah, I'm really curious about, sorry, just that point on DeFi. It's kind of, I guess, sort of understood in every industry, whether you're talking about automating something with a smart contract for escrow or something like DeFi, peer-to-peer finance. Law enforcement or a regulator is always going to look for the phrase, unfortunately, is a throat to choke, right? Like somebody needs to be held responsible. Do you see a path to where either it's obviously the answer is not a developer, right? And that we've had a lot of conversations as an industry about front ends or who essentially should be the party there. Do you think we're going to, potentially get some clarity on that, just, as far as autonomy goes? Because it feels like we're getting closer and closer to, the ability of users to really transact without these intermediaries that the industry has had for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the exciting one of the exciting aspects of this technology is the ability of disintermediated not only finance, and I think that's also an important thing to remember as we write the rules. A lot of us at the SEC, CFTC, we're thinking financial applications, but there are a lot of other applications. We've got to be careful not to constrain those. But yes, I don't want to end up in a world where we're forcing intermediation. That sort of defeats the whole point. But I think you are right to point to the fact that as regulators, we're so used to having an intermediary that we're going to always look around for one. And I think you've seen that in some of the ways that we've talked about decentralization at the SEC. It's always been so-called decentralization. And to be fair, a lot of decentralization is just so-called. There actually is some kind of central party there that is doing something. But I think this is a really important conversation for us to have, and it's important for us to have it with people who are developers, who are using the disintermediated technology. And at the end of the day, what I expect is that much activity will run through intermediaries, even if there's decentralization in the background. So that maybe solves a lot of the problems, but we shouldn't impose more stringent requirements on decentralized finance than we do for other peer-to-peer kind of interactions in the non-crypto world. So obviously, I have a lot of thinking to do on this issue, but that's why I put it out there.
We'll sidebar that at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hester, I understand SEC staffers and the task force are actually trying to get a better understanding of how staking may or may not fit into existing securities laws. We saw yesterday the state of Vermont dropped a case against Coinbase over staking as a service. Seems like the industry, or at least sort of the legal and the regulators are kind of coming to the consensus that maybe some kinds of staking are exempt from securities laws, maybe others fit into securities laws. Can you tell us what you've learned so far from your meetings? I understand you've had a couple meetings with industry players about staking and how you guys are thinking about it now, because under Gensler, it seemed to be a big no-no.
Well, we have thought about that issue. It was one of the issues that I outlined as something that just in my first sort of speech that I outlined was something that I'm thinking about. And it's an area where I think the need for clarity is very clear, right? We need to provide some clarity. And so I'm hoping that we can do that sometime soon.
Gotcha. And will staking be a component of ETFs? Can you say anything around that?
Well, that was a criticism that we heard very early on in terms of not allowing staking, whereas I think in some other jurisdictions that's not a problem at all. And so it's something that I'd like us to think about and figure out a way forward there, because I think at the end of the day, it's better for the investors in exchange traded products if that is something that's open to providers of those products to allow participation in staking.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting issue. I was actually talking to one of the authors on Mika, and they were talking about carving it out. And I don't think this is a very widely held belief, but it was kind of music to my ears, and I wish that we could put it on a billboard. He referred to staking as a purely technical activity, and is one of the European regulators, and any financial benefit from it was purely incidental. Do you think we're ever going to get to a place, first of all, where we've explained staking to legislators or regulators enough that we make that distinction? And then do you think that's a view that would ever catch on this side of the pond, or is that just a bridge too far?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly where we have to provide clarity is to sort of draw some lines to say whether this is whether a staking service is a securities product or not. And so I think those are exactly the right issues to be raising. It can be very easy for an eager securities regulator to turn all kinds of programs into securities offerings. Some of them are, and some of them aren't, and that's where we have to help people figure that out.
I also want to talk to you about meme coins. That's something that I've definitely, dabbled with. I've seen the debacle all over crypto Twitter, the conversations, the pump and dumps, unfortunately, and also the recent developments from the SEC regarding meme coins. What was the decision behind that stance to view them as collectibles?
So the Division of Corporation Finance at the SEC put out a statement saying, look, meme coins, as broadly understood, and you can look at the statement to kind of understand how we're looking at them, are not securities. And I think that the thinking is there's a lot of activity now in that space, and it's really important for people to know who are buying meme coins that they're not getting the protection of the securities laws. That doesn't mean that there aren't other anti-fraud regimes out there that might cover them, but they should know that these are not securities within the securities ambit. And I think we should have been doing more of that in recent years when we saw a lot of activity in a space, whether it was crypto staking, crypto lending, issuing meme coins, NFTs. There are lots of areas where we could have come out pretty early with guidance. And I think that's kind of how I was thinking about the meme coin issue. If Congress wants to come up with a regime around meme coins, or if another regulator thinks it's within its jurisdiction, that's fine. But I think it was really important for us to say, don't expect our protection here.
Yeah.
And I am, as you say, there's a lot to worry about in terms of pump and dumps and
Right.
bad activity. But I think a lot of people also are having fun with meme coins, and maybe they don't expect their expectations are this is entertainment more than anything else. But people need to go in eyes wide open.
Are any of them catching your eye? Do you like any of the meme coins?
I have too many comments to read and too many difficult securities issues to think about.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of your guidance, I noticed there was sort of a disclaimer, and it basically said, just because we're, the SEC, are not going to regulate meme coins does not mean it's a free-for-all. Watch out where you spend your money. And also, there is the possibility that if you're doing bad things, other regulators, state, federal, could come after you. I'm curious to know, if the SEC is not going to regulate meme coins, who do you think, whose remit is that, just off the top of your head?
Oh, well, I mean, I think CFTC has suggested that maybe there's some authority there, and state regulators and perhaps the FTC. I mean, I think there could be a lot of potential state attorneys general, perhaps. There could be a lot of potential interest in behavior that's really designed to rip other people off. So people, more generally, just because there's a shift in the way the government is now looking, the federal government is looking at crypto issues and wanting to provide more clarity, it doesn't mean that you get to do terrible things in the name of crypto and expect not to face punishment for it.
I'm aligned with the idea. I'm kind of fond of telling people, like, if you're still in crypto at this point, and you're in meme coins, like, you probably have some awareness of your vulnerability there, unfortunately or fortunately. And I think it was also important to see from sort of my side of things, you guys carve out the nuance on, strictly the promotion of a meme coin, or the team at the SEC on the notion of a meme coin, promotion alone on social media, and then negotiating listings activity sort of in and of itself is not enough, right, to satisfy that component of the Howey test. I think that was much more thoughtful than, candidly, like a lot of the, actions we saw sort of over the last 4 years. So hope that we see more of that. You also brought up a good point about the CFTC or the FTC, right? There are so many agencies and the industry occasionally, and this is a problem in TradFi as well, right? Where we say, we're reporting actually for, this one activity to 6 different regulators, right? And it doesn't seem like you're necessarily in the camp that we would need a new distinct crypto regulator. it seems like the existing agencies we have are probably able to cover it through some division of resources and talent and jurisdiction. At the same time, we do seem to be living in an era where resources for government agencies in general are being curtailed a bit. And I was just curious if you and the SEC are going to be, I guess, responding to that in any way. Is it, something that, will affect the agency at all? Or do you feel like, we still have so much room to go, with the conversations we're having?
Well, I mean, I think we're always thinking about how to use our resources best and most effectively. I actually think that's what a lot of our conversation today has focused on, is thinking carefully about how to spend limited resources. And whether we're in an era where every agency is being asked to really think hard about that, or we're in an era where there's just the normal budget process, normal appropriations process with Congress, we do have to justify what we do. And that's one of the big reasons I just think what we did in recent years is so sad, because we spent so many resources of our own and frankly of people in the industry on marching down this road of trying to get clarity through enforcement. And those resources could have been used for better purposes. So, I think maybe there's something good about being in an environment where we really have to think hard about what to do, and it's less likely that we'll use the wrong tool for the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm. One last question on the meme coin front. Has there been other instances in the past where the SEC has classified assets or lack of as collectibles? And then also, where does this kind of leave the rest of cryptocurrencies?
So that's a great question about whether we've done something similar with respect to collectibles in the past. It's possible that we have through a no action letter, and I'm not...
I'm thinking of beating babies or something.
Well, so, I think a lot of people have rethought about Beanie Babies and other similar, baseball cards and all kinds of things. The staff has issued no action letters about lots of different things, and that's why I'm not going to say definitively whether there has been a no action letter on a collectible. But how to think about other types of crypto assets. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to provide some clarity on, and I think there are other areas that would, that we can sort of carve out a type of crypto asset and say, this isn't within our space. And so we're working on thinking about that. And if people have ideas where it would be helpful for us to say that, then that is something I'm open to. I think we could have done that on some kind of NFTs. And I think had we done that on NFTs, again, you have to look at the facts and circumstances. But if we had said some types probably aren't within our space, it would have allowed artists and creators to experiment in ways that I just think they haven't been able to, because there's been this overhang of worry. But if there are other areas, people should definitely let us know.
Hester, tell us about your experience at the White House Crypto Summit. It was nice to see you there, by the way. I was there for the press part, but I wasn't privy to the conversations that were going on inside the actual summit at the roundtable. So just tell us, what was your most memorable takeaway, aside from, of course, the unveiling of the FIFA trophy?
It was a beautiful
Most
trophy.
important thing, yeah.
It was really great to see a lot of people who are excited about new possibilities in a world where there is a willingness of government to work with them in providing clarity. And so for me, that was the real takeaway, is the sense of relief and also willingness to roll up their sleeves and work hard to try to get to a good place. There are a lot of hard issues, a lot of issues that are left over from the last bit of time where government was taking a very different approach that we're going to have to wrestle with and come to a good place on. And so I think there's a real readiness to do that. So that was, for me, it was exciting to see that.
Yeah, I know. You've experienced, I guess, this past administration. You've worked with the incoming SEC Commissioner, Paul Atkins. I actually, by the way, saw Linda Jang recently. She says hello. She told me about the time you guys had the all-nighters on Dodd-Frank. So you've seen a lot of legislation, and it's obviously very exciting to have someone like Paul Atkins coming in. What do you think we can expect? Like, you've been able to accomplish so much in this capacity, as an agency, at least in undoing sort of some of the wrongs or some of the I guess more egregious suits that the industry has gone through. Where do you see the industry going from here? And can you give us any insights on future Commissioner Atkins?
Yeah, well, as you said, I worked with Commissioner Atkins when he was a commissioner before, and so did now acting Chairman Ueda. We worked together for Atkins, and so I think there's a unified desire to figure out, what the right rules are, and then enforce them in a way that makes sense. And so I think it's a really exciting time. There are a lot of other issues besides crypto that will be on the agenda of the incoming chairman. Capital formation is something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention in recent years, so I think we'll spend time doing that. But I think the industry should look forward to having an open door in not only the industry, any members of the public who are interested. As I said, we want to hear from skeptics too. So anyone who wants to come in and talk to us, I think there'll be a good environment for having those conversations. And we really do mean it when we say come in and talk to us now. And I think that people will have a much more, I think it'll take time, right? People have been, it's been a really rough ride for a lot of people. And I recognize that. And I don't think you change that just by, even with personnel changes or just by saying that it's a different culture now and we have a different approach. But I hope people will see through our actions that there really is a change.
I was going to ask you, like, how do you think the leadership approach will be different than Gary Gensler's? But I'm pretty sure we could read between the lines on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we have a commission that has different points of view and, different approaches, but across the board, and I think this is probably, people in crypto don't realize this, but across the board, they're over the recent years, there's been a real concern about the agency doing a lot without listening adequately to the people who are going to have to live with what we do. And so that really is I think, the core of what has to change. We need to be listening to people. We need to be deliberate in how we approach things. And I think that's how we can best move forward in a way that best shepherds our resources, but also gets the best results.
Your term as a commissioner, Hester, is up in June, but I think you can stay on until the end of this Congress. But if President Trump was to renominate you again, would you stay on in your new role as leader of crypto policy at the SEC?
I have a lot of things that I want to do before I go, but I think that the period during which I can hang on, unless the president puts someone else in my seat, which obviously he can do. I think that period is a good amount of time to get a lot done, especially because I really want to move quickly. The sooner we can get stuff resolved, then we can move on and it'll be more normal time and we won't need a dedicated crypto task force anymore.
Yeah, I'm curious. It makes a lot of sense. I know there are a lot of people in the industry who would love a crystal ball or would love to see you, sort of on our side of the table. So in the event that you don't end up getting asked to stay on, we've seen some really great allies of the industry go into, whether it's advisory roles or private practice. You want to help us break some news here? Where are you going to be heading if you don't continue on?
One of the things I love about the ethics rules is that I can't even think about what I want to do until I leave. And so I will tell you that, I'm sick now, and I'm sorry for being on the show when I'm sick. But I look forward to some rest after I leave.
I heard something about
Sure. Had to ask.
beekeeping, maybe, Hester?
Yeah, although I'm not sure I can wrangle the bees in a way that will be effective. I'm fascinated by beekeeping, but I'm a little scared by it too.
We could always add you as a host.
Yeah.
We're more than happy to bring you.
I have to tell you no to that.
Fair enough.
You guys
Fair.
are a good you're a good group. You don't need the addition of me.
Oh, please. Hester, this has been such a pleasure. All in all, we really would love to know, what do you want your legacy at the SEC and in general to be?
Yeah, I mean, as I've said in the past, I really want the legacy to be that the SEC is not this overwhelming entity, right? That people are, of course, thinking about complying with the securities rules, but it's not dominating their thinking. And so a good legacy for me would be for people 5 years ago and 5 years from now or 10 years from now to have no idea who I am. And so I think that is kind of what I'm trying to get the legacy to be, is just the SEC is just going to be an agency that does its job well. People can go in and ask it questions when they need to, and it protects investors and protects the markets, and we move on from there.
I love that. That's honestly a take that not many people in the crypto industry have. I think they want to live on forever. So definitely refreshing.
People out there are building interesting things. I'm just a regulator.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Hester. We really enjoyed you as our first guest.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Hester.
much.
We'll get you back on soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.